Hello, Intentionally Act Live family. Welcome, welcome, welcome. You may have noticed that neither of us are Enrico, your usual host for Intentionally Act Live. My name is Jennifer Fortune, Chief of Strategy for Team All Aces, and I am in the host seat today. I'm joined by my lovely colleague, Octavia Chambers. Hi, Octavia.
Hi, Jennifer.
So today we are going to dig into a lovely discussion around Black female leadership. This is in continuation of a conversation that began on March 11th with Dr. Rudel and our usual host Enrico around Black male leadership. And so today the light is on us, and so we're going to kick into it and really dig into all the good things around BIPOC leadership as it relates to Black women specifically and their organizational needs. So, welcome, everyone. Welcome again, Octavia. How are you?
I'm doing good. It's Friday, sunshine, so I can't complain. How are you?
I'm feeling good as well. I yesterday was such a fog because I was feeling tired. But I went to bed early and I woke up today rejuvenated. So I'm well rested and feeling good.
Okay, that's awesome.
And every time I say something like that, I'm like, Octavia does have a baby at home, y'all. So I feel like I'm not being sensitive to what is reality for Octavia when I'm like, oh yeah, I slept amazingly last night in my
Uh,
bed alone. But
hey, I can live vicariously through you. That's fine.
thank you, Octavia. So happy you're here with me today, and you're looking lovely.
Thank you as
BTW.
well.
So tell us what made you fall in love with advancing racial equity?
Yeah, so I've always been interested and passionate about social justice and equity, especially as it related to Black women, because I always kind of found myself in the space of advocate and warrior because of the identities that I hold, but also because the privilege and the access that I had growing up. um I'd always been community focused, but I understood that the survival and success of me and people that look like me was dependent on us being able to get in. And so um often it took me like fitting in to kind of make it seem like we weren't, as Black women, the stereotypes that were being perpetuated in the media, which was often super heavy for me, but something that I chose to take on because I had the capacity. Like, I wasn't worried about food insecurity when I got home. I had a two-parent household. I had supportive family members, and so for me, it was okay for me to take on that load of trying to push back against stereotypes that were presented growing up, and through all aspects of my life. And so I also just really fell in love with making Black people at different points of my life feel welcome and be okay being themselves in all the spaces that they navigated in.
Mhm.
And so it's really, I fell in love because my survival, my success was dependent on it, but also because there was a joy in seeing others feel like they were okay being who they were in all the spaces that they were in.
Mhm. I love that. An advocate and warrior. And so, uh, for our audience members, just a little background about Octavia. So, she is currently a project manager and facilitator for Team All Aces. And she comes to us with, newest team member, but she comes to us with a wealth of knowledge and experiences leading DEI and organizational development efforts across various industries. And so to hear you say, like, I stood in the role of advocate and warrior as a Black woman, that is so beautiful because it further reinforces what you just mentioned at the end of your statement. Like, yes, this was part of my survival. And I also experienced joy in standing in these roles, which I think is something that Black women, we often that experience of joy is often taken away from us,
Yeah.
or something that we just simply don't shine light on, in various spaces. So thank you for sharing that in that way. So it, I love my podcasting and my, audio stimulation. So I was listening to some Brene Brown, who, for those who don't know, she publicly acknowledged and credits wonderful Maya Angelou for much of the framing and foundation for the work that she does. We know her as a thinker and brilliant researcher, and I appreciate that she accredits a Black woman as her muse. And so I was listening to some Brene Brown, and she said uh, something that like really stood out to me when thinking about Black women in organizations that often do not fully recognize the power that we bring to an organization, and often are not valued in the ways that we ought to be valued. So the quote says, "The opposite of belonging is fitting in. Fitting in is assessing and acclimating. Belonging is belonging to yourself first, speaking your truth, telling your story, and never betraying yourself for other people. True belonging doesn't require changing who you are, it requires being who you are." I, you know, scrambled and wrote that thing down, because this idea of belonging, first starting with the belonging to thyself, I think is something that is so critical when we think about Black women leadership. Because often we are forced to conform to things that are outside of us, right? And so here we are moving up in the ranks in an organization, and we are actually, though, externally it looks like we're progressing, we're actually moving further and further away from ourselves, right?
Mm.
Because we're having to conform to these different ideas and standards around whiteness, that do not really reflect who we are at our cores, right? And so we end up at the top. And I think this is when we end up having, Black women who simply aren't happy, who aren't fulfilled, who aren't experiencing joy in these leadership roles, right? They're isolated. They're feeling alone. And I'm sure we all can also think of like the Black women who we've been under as managers, or supervisors, and we've had hard times with them, right? Because they
Mm.
are showing up in these specific ways that are harmful to us, and
Mm.
not even realizing it sometimes, right? Like not even realizing, like,
Mm.
oh, the way I'm engaging with my colleague right now isn't even true to like the sisterhood that exists between Black women regularly, because
Mm.
I've lost touch with that, right? Because of all of these years. Okay, so all of that to say, how does this quote resonate with you as a Black woman and leader?
Yeah, everything you just said resonated with me. I saw myself in what you said, even in the interactions with having a woman of color reporting to me, and me being in such a toxic space. Because I was in such a toxic space, I wasn't showing up, and I had to do some reflection work, and understand that on the back end, and apologize, and show up in a different way. But it took some work. But I guess going back to the the quote piece, being seen like as a competent leader, it never really aligns with being my authentic self. So like being a Black woman, I already had two visible strikes against me, and then also having some invisible ones, because I have anxiety, PTSD, and depression. And so I never thought showing up as my authentic self in any space would actually allow me to belong, because there's just so many different things that society says is wrong, or not what a true leader is. I even had a boss one time tell me that. He said, women and introverts, aren't good leaders because they make people uncomfortable.
Oh.
And so, yeah, he's listening to my face. And I didn't even realize it was racism at that point. I just internalized it and was like, oh, so, I guess I was early in my career. I was like, oh, I guess that means that I'm not, or I can't be a good leader unless I act extroverted, which
Mhm.
shifted me for a very long time. So historically, I would say that belonging for me was all about fitting in. I had another role where I came into the organization. They were actually on their diversity kick, and there was one black woman there who had been there maybe for like 10 years, and then they just hired a whole bunch of us at the same time. It's comical to her. But we came in, and, we're like looking around and we're like, okay, so the only black woman that has been here for a long time, because it's a great company, you want to stay here, is this black woman. She's amazing. This is what she looks like. She wears her hair long and straight. She dresses nice every day. There were like two other black men who were in leadership positions. One was an older gentleman. He dressed in a suit every day. And another one, he was kind of close friends with the CEO. And so he dressed like everyone else around the office dressed, which was like jeans, tees, and a t-shirt every day.
Mm.
Um, and it's interesting though in thinking about how they were all interpreted. Like the fella that wore he was a VP or SVP that wore like jeans and a t-shirt. He was honestly in conversations that I was in with other folks that were in leadership. He was seen as lazy. The black man that wore suits every day was seen as doing too much or too overbearing, too controlling. And so I'm coming into this space. I'm like, okay, let me assess the situation. What can my hair look like? How do I need to dress every day to ensure that I'm seen as someone that's competent? Because the role that I was doing was such across the organization, and I had access to the CEO, SVPs, VPs, but it was not in a manager or higher level position. And
Mm.
so it was a tricky space to be in. And so I'm like, okay, well, this worked for her. It doesn't seem like it's causing too many issues. So let me just go ahead and get my little long straight weave in, call it a day, dress up every day. Um, and coming to like realize as because in that role I was hired in to do like a portion of my work was to do diversity, equity, and inclusion. So through my transformation process and actually learning more about the work and actually doing it for myself instead of like doing it in this external way, I like transformed into a space where I was like, you know what, I'm gonna wear my hair the way I want to wear my hair. I'm gonna dress the way I want to dress, because at the end of the day, whether I dress nice or I dress not so nice, um, I'm not going to be enough regardless. Like, there's always going to be an issue or a situation just because of who I am. And so it became this thing where I was like, okay, I'm going to change my hair, give myself a pep talk. I'm like, I'm going to get these faux locks. And these are kind of like, it's faux locks for those who may not know what that is.
Mhm.
It's like, I'm going to get these faux locks. I'm going to change my hair because we can't all just be sitting here. I know some of us want to be rocking braids. We want to be wearing our natural hair and our froze, but none of us are doing it. And so gave myself a pep talk, did my hair, told myself in the mirror that it was going to be okay. And every day went to work, wore my hair, of course, answered the questions, did the things. But I saw, like, in the weeks after that, all the other Black women that were hired at the same time as me shifted into natural hairstyles.
Mm.
And it, and honestly, I think it was just one of us were waiting to make sure that it was okay, and that we wouldn't be seen as less than or less competent. And I knew, just in the position, going back to the early response, in the position that I was in, I wasn't in like a leadership role at that time, but my role gave me so much access to leadership, and I had already came in with a level of respect that I had the capacity to do that, to 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 start that act of resistance, even though it shouldn't be act of resistance being myself, but I had the capacity to do it because I had the privilege and the access. And so it honestly, when thinking about like fitting in and versus belonging, um, it's an everyday process of belonging to myself, and speaking my truth. Like, it's an everyday pep talk, and it's an everyday space of growth. Something that I had to transform into, and to be unafraid of the consequences. Like, I'm okay if me being who I am authentically now and speaking my truth now, especially as it relates to racial equity, means I don't work for you anymore. That's fine. I guess today is my last day, and I've done that. So
Mhm.
but it wasn't just who I was initially coming in. I was socialized in different ways, just like all of us are. But getting into that transformation and that space of growth where I did start to belong to myself and to see, you know, losing pieces of my identity wasn't worth what I was gaining, um, in doing that.
Mhm.
And it's something that I still struggle with every day, but it's a more comfortable place
Mhm. Mhm. Whew,
now.
girl. Okay, so you just you just gave us so much. Okay, so I am thinking about, you know, uh, how you started in sharing that um, there was a precedent set for you, right? And you fell in suit, followed what this Black woman was doing, which made sense, right? Like,
Mhm.
I don't know what this culture is about, but this one person who looks like me, this is how they're showing up. They're in leadership, so let me just follow in line. I know that is not uncommon, and but at some point you decided to step out of line, right? And that took a
Mhm.
whole lot of boldness and courage. And you shared just like what that looked like for you practically, right? Like talking to yourself. And so like I'm thinking about how we always emphasize to clients um, when talking about the importance of the skills to be disruptive to racism and be disruptive to these unhealthy ways of organizations functioning. There are a set of skills we have to have, right? And one of those skills being communication. And you talked heavily about the intra communication you did, right? That communication with yourself, whereas like, all right, sis, like, nah, you don't need to be wearing the long straight weave like her. That's not you. Like, you can do
Mhm.
this. And I also want to acknowledge that you also set us up with sharing up front that there were privileges that you had outside of the workplace that also facilitated how you were showing up in
Mhm.
your workplace as well, right? Because
Yeah.
we have to be real in acknowledging that the courage and boldness that it requires to step out of line is often a detriment to people's livelihoods,
Yep.
right? And
Yeah.
so, if this is the one income that is coming into my household that's allowing me to take care of myself, my family, etc., it may not be possible for me to be stepping out of line the way Octavia did,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
And so, thinking about just like what type of processing an individual has to go through as a Black person to think like, okay, I want to step out of line, but is this possible and feasible for me right now,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
um, and I'll come back to that later because I do want to dig into your thoughts about that. But you ta- you what you the picture you painted is all the experiences that you crafted out for us very much fall into research calls as covering, right? So this idea of, um, downplaying certain aspects of your identity, and ultimately having a negative impact on like one's self-esteem, one's
Mhm.
sense of self in the workplace, diminishing one's commitment to the workplace, right?
Mhm.
Because here I am showing up not as my true self, um, and I'm miserable
Yep.
doing that, right? Um, and I think that's also really important to call out, right? When organizations hear that Black people and Black women have to navigate through these experiences of covering, it's
Mhm.
not just something that's impacting us individually, right? Like you're actually going to end up losing us, right?
Mhm.
And it may not be like us leaving the organization, but my quality of work is suffering, right? I'm
Mhm.
not able to show up with my full brilliance in hand, right? Maybe I'm actually even choosing that, right? Like maybe I'm
Mhm.
like, you know what? I don't want to give you all my goodies because you're just not worth it. You're not
Yep.
this environment is not treating me in a way that lets me say it is okay to show up and be fully present and engaged in this work, right? And pour
Right.
myself into this work, right?
Right.
And we all know the history of Black women just pouring themselves into things and not getting any credit or
Yep.
recognition for it. Um,
Mhm.
and so uh, I I would love for you to share, like, for us, what was it a particular, like, we need to know, because like, okay, you told us like, okay, you decided like, all right, no, I'm gonna have this, I'm gonna like show up in this way, I'm having these pep talks with myself in the mirror, I'm affirming myself as well. But what was it that led you there? Like, was it a particular instance that you're like,
Mhm.
nah, this is mine? Like, was it, was it some type of development you were doing on the side that helped you realize and go through this what you call transformation, where it's like, oh no, like you're actually disconnected from yourself, right? Like, what was it? Can you walk our audience through that? And for the audience, if what Octavia has shared thus far is resonating with you, if this idea of covering within the workplace is something that you can agree with, please like share in the chat with us, like what has those experiences look like for you as well. Okay, Octavia,
Yeah.
bring us in, let us know.
So that's such a good question. I feel like it was like multiple different things. One, I value and see myself as an authentic and honest, a transparent person. I'm always aware of like things I need to improve on. And so as I was starting to lead DI work, I was like, I am such a hypocrite. I can't even change my hair in this space, and then I'm asking other people to risk themselves, their safeties in some type of aspect, in the vein of this diversity, equity, inclusion work that's not really actually happening at this organization. It looks great on paper, but it's not really happening. How can I be a leader in this space if I can't even change my hair without feeling uncomfortable? Um, and at that time, I'd also started going to therapy. I had amazing Black therapists who did like diversity, equity, inclusion work for 20 plus years. And so lots of my therapy was just her giving me consultation on how to do my job
Mhm.
effectively. But she was also very instrumental in me realizing and understanding how disconnected I was from my body. I didn't even notice or realize when I had left, but I wasn't there, and it took a long time to reintegrate in that way. And then when I finally did get myself back, I wasn't going to let her go. And so it was a continuous process around there. And then there was something else that you said, not 100% related, but just growing up, my father, he's an engineer. I grew up in Texas, and he would always say, I just want to be able to do my job. Like, I just want to go to work and do my job. My dad's so smart. And the things that he's done just in his career, people wouldn't think, because of the way he looks. And I didn't even understand that until more recently when you're talking about covering. um we just want to go and do our jobs. We're brilliant, we're great, we're strategic, we're smart, we are capable, we can shift and make your organization is so innovative. We bring in fresh ideas. Yet I can't go to work and just do my job because I'm worried about what I'm looking like, what my hair is looking like, how I'm speaking to you, how I'm going to sound in the email. Can I raise my voice or be passionate about something without being seen as a specific way?
Mhm.
And so I think through that process that I went through and really feeling like a hypocrite and also learning how to connect with myself again, um, it was really me landing in that space of this is not okay. And this is not something that I'm going to accept. And I want to be able to be who I am, be as productive as I can be. And so I'm going to start peeling off these layers, these coverings. And if it doesn't work for you, or if it doesn't work for me, then it's time for me to leave. And I think in this last situation where speaking about the job with the Black woman, um, I did, and I started uncovering. I started speaking my truth. I started providing context that I never would have provided before, even to the CEO, being like, hey, this just happened. If you don't talk to the Black people about it, like, it's going to be a problem. Um, and in that, got sick, um, lost my hair. My body just shut down, just because of the heavy toll that it took, um, to truly engage in the work in a way to make sure that it was actually having the impact that we were saying it was having. Um, and and I think organizations don't even think or realize the cost that comes with being your authentic self as a Black woman in the workspace, especially if in your leadership position.
Mhm.
Um, and so, and I know my experience is not particularly unique. When thinking about Black women in leadership. And so, and I am fairly new to all ACEs. And so I'm wondering if you, Jennifer, can share how all ACEs has really shifted to help organizations help create a culture of belonging when we're thinking about Black women.
Yeah. Um, so I'm thinking about two things. One, all of our work is anchored in reframing, right? Reframing for people what racism is, how it works, and explicitly what they can do about it. And so oftentimes we are having to sit down with our clients and really help them dig into like big questions like, so what does leadership actually mean, right? Because if your standards, your definition and your standards around leadership are based on whiteness, and then you have Black women, other BIPOC individuals who deserve to be in leadership roles or already are in leadership roles, but they're only able to do so by conforming to the set standards that you have laid out for them. All we are doing is perpetuating oppression, right? Because all we are doing is showing up, thinking in the ways, behaving in the ways that are harmful to people of color and white people as well, right? Which is something that we are often having to reframe for folks who want to do DEI work, right? Like racism is not just a Black people issue. Racism
Right.
is not just a BIPOC issue. Racism is an issue that touches and covers and impacts everyone. Um, BIPOC folks are disproportionately impacted by it, right? Is the
Yeah.
caveat here. And so, yeah, the reframing that we have to do to help folks understand, well, if this is what you understand about leadership, um, and this is what we know about how the characteristics of whiteness show up in systems of oppression like racism. What you're doing is actually being conducive to racism, right? As opposed to disrupting it. Um, And then the other piece is in reframing, and also the learning experiences that we facilitate for our clients. And I often hear this from the BIPOC individuals in an organization, like we're able to give them reference, right? Reference to what they're actually experiencing within that organization, right? So maybe
Mhm.
I'm a Black woman who's not in a leadership position, or maybe I am, and I'm learning about, you know, anything related to my experiences as an employee within an organization, related to the systems of oppression that are entrenched in our organization, and like the way we are able to walk people through those learning experiences helps them to point out, oh, that thing you're talking about, like I actually just experienced it, or that thing you're
Yeah.
talking about, I'm actually in it right now.
Mhm.
And that often, the feedback that I've heard is like, it has been incredibly helpful to just have the framing and the language to the things that we are experiencing on a daily basis. But when you're swimming in it, it's hard to like get clear on like, so what is that? I know it's something, right?
Mhm.
But
Yep.
I'm not able to move through these waves. Like it's something. And us coming in and pointing out, oh yeah, well, here are the elements of a toxic organization, and this very thing
Mhm.
that you're doing
Mhm.
speaks to toxicity, right? And this is the very reason why you're struggling with attracting BIPOC individuals and leadership. This is why you're struggling to retain BIPOC individuals in leadership. This is why people are leaving abruptly and not even allowing you to have an intentional transition process because they've reached
Yep.
their peak, right?
Mhm.
So I think our ability to really reframe for folks like what this is when we talk about being a disruptor of racism, like what is that racism, what does it mean to be disruptive to it, right?
Mm. Yeah.
Because we know like it is not uncommon for folks to limit their understanding and even their action to like a set of steps that they're checking off, right?
Yep.
While people are still struggling, are still disconnected from their body, just like you just painted for us. So thank you for that. And I do want to go back to something you mentioned earlier about, so you painted for us like having external support, which is critical, right? So for us as Black women to be okay with getting the support that we need in whatever form it looks like, right? So for you, it was in the form of therapy. For others, it may be an actual coach, though it does sound like your therapist was sitting in a coaching role.
Yeah, and I have the coach too, so
For others it may be other things, right? So you brought in the piece around your actual your physical body, right? And so for other people
Mhm.
it may be other healing modalities that complement what you're doing in therapy or what you're doing with your coach, and that's really important, right? Because it is um although we are moving in the right direction, stigma still exists, right? Stigma
Mhm.
still exists. And in addition to stigma, there's also, um, the standards that we're held up to, right?
Yeah.
Like I I can't sit back and allow myself to actually be in a safe place because I have to go take care of all of these things. Um,
Mhm.
and it it may not this sitting in a space where I'm getting help, not being able to connect the dots between the value of that help and being able to show up fully as yourself and being able to um, take care of your community even better may
Yeah.
not be connections that people are able to make when they're in it, right?
Oh, yeah.
yeah. But so I thank you for, you know, being vulnerable and sharing that, because I think that is important for our audience members, particularly Black women, to also hear, because it's real. Like like we can't do this alone,
No.
and we have our connections to our communities. In other spaces, and often the workplace is left out of that. And so if you're unable to get the support in the way that, you know, we just talked about, what are some other ways you could get support, right? Like who can you go to
Hmm.
talk about these challenges when you're facing them, right? So
Yeah.
that you're not in a space where you're holding it all in, you're
Mhm.
retaining it
Yeah.
all in, you know. Sidebar. So last night I was listening to, because you know all I did is listen to, so I was listening to a live conversation with Nikki Giovanni, the poet,
Mm.
and she her newest book, um I don't remember the full title. I just know it has rain in the title. But she was talking about how she came to write this book and what made her write it. And she gave a snippet of a story of how, you know, she had a seizure, and she, you know, sitting in front of her doctor, and her doctor is like, oh, you know, like this could be linked to, you know, how you're eating and like increased salt intake, etc. And she was like, my eating is not that bad, and also
Mm.
like I'm Black and there's just things I'm gonna eat, period.
Right.
But more importantly, I don't think this actually has to do with like a lifestyle choice. Like I
Mm.
think this has to do with me retaining my tears, right?
Mm.
So thinking about like when you cry, how your tears are salty. She was like, I actually think this has to do with retaining my tears. I
Wow.
all my life have not allowed myself to cry.
Mm.
And so here I am at the age that I am. I think Nikki Giovanni. Okay, I'm not gonna guess her age. I remember hearing her saying it, but I don't remember. But I know when she said, I was like, "You're what?" Right? She was amazing for her age. Um, but she was like, you know, for all these decades that I've been alive, I was taught not to cry.
Yeah.
I was socialized in that way, and so here I am at this age having my first seizure. I do believe it's linked to the retainment of my tears the retaining
Wow.
of my tears all these years. Um, and so I bring that up to say, like, for us as Black women, like who who are we able to be in space with that allows us to shed those tears so that we're not retaining them? Who are we able to be
Mm.
in space with that allows us to, you know, talk things out and um you know, get the reframing, the perspective shift that we need to hear from those who are on the outside, right? Like a friend being able to say, sis, you don't even like straight weave. Why are you wearing it? Right?
Right.
That's
That part.
important. And
Yeah.
that can make a big difference, right?
Yes. Hmm.
So all that to say, you know, even if you're in a space where you're not ready for, or you're just unable to access, you know, support in the way that we've tailored, you know, think of what is accessible to you, right? Like
Yes.
the sisters that are accessible to you, the people who you look up to in your family and your wider community that are accessible to you, like these all make a difference. And some
Mm.
of us are lucky to even have that within their workplace, like maybe it's that one person. Others not so much, but there is community somewhere. And so where can we get that support?
Mm.
Okay, so
That's good.
all of that to bring us to what does change look like? You know, what does
Mm.
change look like? So for you, Octavia, based on your past experiences, what shifts would you like to see organizations make to better support Black women in leadership? And audience, if you have thoughts on this question, please do share with us as well. What shifts would you like to see better support Black women in leadership?
That's so good. Everything you just said. Building on something you said, orgs being a little bit more emotionally intelligent, to help support Black women who take on some of that additional emotional labor. You're speaking about like having community or that one person sometimes within the workspace to go to. I was that one person for folks in that organization, partly because of
Mhm.
my role, partly because that's just who I am as a person, high level of empathy. And um, it was heavy. And
Mm,
I think
mhm,
that also had an impact on me because I'm taking in all of these racist experiences that this other person has had, and not really having internal barriers and boundaries to protect myself, or understanding the impact that hearing these experiences on a daily basis or hearing the experiences and feelings and thoughts of my white colleagues who may be earlier on their journey and not understanding why we're even talking about this, having to be in those spaces where I'm defending work that my livelihood is connected to. I think orgs being a little bit more emotionally intelligent, so that they can, one, have the right people in those spaces. Like, I had my boss, she was technically supposed to be leading diversity, equity, inclusion in this one role. She didn't feel like she had the capacity to do it, and so it was shifted to me, which is often happens with Black women coming into a space. You're like, oh well, you're a Black woman, it should go better if you lead it, or it's going to be more well received. um, and that shouldn't always be the case. Like, I had a background in doing public health work and looking at health inequities and health disparities, and there's a whole nother skill set and like level of awareness that you need to be able to lead diversity, equity, inclusion work within an institution. Like, it is a whole different level. And I think organizations also need to be a little bit more intentional about that, and be able to be okay with taking on a risk, the risk of the work, because at the end of the day, it's not something that's going to go like, if it goes well, but I mean, something's probably going wrong with the way the work is done. Like,
mm,
it's gonna be uncomfortable. It's things are gonna happen. People are gonna quit. I mean, I had people in a training just going wild, being disruptive. Like, it's gonna raising their hand saying, "I don't know why I'm here. Why are we talking about this at work?" Like, it's gonna happen. Like, that's just what the work is. I think organizations need to be okay with that. Um, in order to truly create safe spaces or safer spaces for this work to be done. Um, and also not depending on your Black employees to educate you as a leader. Like, I'm sorry, me giving feedback to SVPs and VPs in my manager then director role, my safety is at risk. I mean, I know you're saying you're open to feedback and all of this, yes, and it's automatically, anytime you get feedback, there is a level of defensiveness. There is honestly a level of emotional intelligence that you need to have in the first place to be able to get feedback around diversity, equity, and inclusion, especially when it's coming from a person of color. And so organizations need to be clear that Black and brown employees are not here to be the people that provide your education. You have a budget for that. Invest in that for your leadership team, especially those that are overseeing and managing people of color.
mhm,
um, and really also not engaging like mixed messaging. And so you're talking about building sense of community. So in organizations, stop making it hard to have employee resource groups. Stop speaking to like, how is this going to benefit the business and the bottom line. If you're truly about creating um, a sense of belonging amongst all your staff, why is them congregating? Because we would say this all the time. The white marketing teams, all white male marketing team, they can go to lunch every day. No one says anything. Three Black people in the kitchen, in the office. The SVP of HR is sneaking around the corner. What y'all
mm,
talking about? Everybody's
mhm,
kind of looking around uncomfortable. Like, don't say that you want to have a space where people feel like they belong, they have a sense of community, and you put barriers and parameters around how that is done. And I think if organizations can engage in like really building that emotional intelligence, really understanding the messaging that they're putting out, and aligning it with the values that they said they have, I feel like we would actually start making progress in this space.
Mhm. Oh, that's so good, Octavia. And your last point about sending mixed messages around things like ERGs or affinity groups within organizations is connected to your first point around, being that person that folks come to release, and being that person that also just has to bear witness to the nonsense that is happening on a regular basis and the heaviness of that, right? And so, if I am carrying all of that on a regular basis, going back to what we were talking about earlier, like what is the community that I can fall back into, to be taken care of? Um, I'm also thinking about uh, the education that you mentioned, not being on the backs of BIPOC folks,
Yeah.
particularly when we know like there's a budget for professional development, right? And so
Hmm.
ensuring your budget is going to that. Um, I'm wondering if you have any experiences where, because what I have experienced seen, um, is the Black woman who is okay with being the go-to person, to help an organization strategize around XYZ issue, um, even though they're not in a leadership or management position. Um, but then not not being compensated for that,
Mm.
right? And then,
Yeah.
once they get to the breaking end, that's when they're like, "Oh, no, I've been doing this for 2 years. Why haven't I been compensated?"
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts for our audience members who may be listening, who may be that person. They're not in leadership, they're not in management, but they are helping leadership and management strategize, and maybe they're doing it for a love, for the people who are impacted on the other end, right? Or
Hmm.
maybe they're doing it because it is a passion area of theirs, but they're just trying to figure out how to bring that passion area into their role as part of their regular responsibility, or maybe their hope is to leverage it as a way to move up in the
Hmm.
organization. Yeah, if you have any thoughts for folks who may be in those roles but aren't being properly compensated, whether whatever that means, right? So it could be
Hmm.
financially compensated, it can be, compensated like through the form of recognition. Hey, we
That
like
part.
don't think that we came up with this idea on our own. No, such and such actually led this. You
Hmm.
didn't see her, and you didn't, you didn't know when it was happening, but she actually led this work, and it is a reason for us adopting this new initiative, etc. Or maybe, compensation is like, hey, like we realize the hard work you've been doing, and so we want to ensure that you get the rest you need, and so please know, like,
Yeah.
we've added 2 wellness days for you to like take as you desire, whatever, right?
Yes.
So yeah, like what thoughts do you have for that, the person who's in that role, and maybe also like the organization who is potentially extracting from that person who's in that role.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot, even in orgs that have someone that's actually supposed to be leading the effort. That oftentimes there are folks of color at different levels of the organization not getting the pay or the visibility or the additional support that are truly blazing trails in the area. And so one thing I would say is to document everything that you're doing. Like, this is something that I learned from someone who did diverse equity inclusion work for a while, and understanding that data and documentation is so support important when you're talking about organizations that are entrenched in white supremacy culture. And so document what you're doing, time track, make sure that you're keeping track of all the successes, all the initiatives, the work products that you're bringing into the space. You have to keep. Don't expect anyone else to actually remember all the amazing things that you did. They won't, or they'll be taking credit for them in some capacity, and so it won't benefit them. So
Mm,
you need to be making sure that you're keeping track of all that. And if your goal is to like be in a position where you're leading diversity, equity, and inclusion work, then take the initiative to write that job description. Show how what you're doing within your role, either it aligns or it doesn't align, or a piece or aspects of it does, and integrate what you are doing and what you want to do, and present that job description. um, I'm sorry, white folks do that all the time. And it's something that I think us as black folks sometimes, I know me personally, I feel like I'm just gonna my mom used to say that, get what you get and you don't throw a fit. And no, like, we have to start. It's very uncomfortable, and it doesn't always work out to our benefit, but we do have to start advocating for what we want, especially in this space, especially when, if there is a realization and understanding that you are bringing things to the table in this space, you are at a little bit of an advantage. And so I would say creating that job description. Whenever we were talking about like wellness days, that was something that I spoke to about whenever I was promoted into overseeing the work. I was like, well, this work is emotionally taxing, so I'm going to need to be able to work from home. Um, Write that in writing, because it became a problem later because it wasn't
mm,
in writing, get what you need in order to be successful in this work. And if you got to pull some research, because data is king, go ahead and do that. Pull some articles, pull some research, talk to other folks that are doing the work in different organizations, and say, this is what they're doing over here, who is our competitor or someone that we align with. Um, I think that we should be adopting some of these same strategies, because, we're in the same industry, and using it like that. And I think when it comes to recognition, I used to try to be a little sneaky. I usually I pump and prime up who I am supporting and who's probably taking the recognition from me, um, but also speak in a way of like, okay, I'm doing this new project that I'm so excited about, and you're so amazing, and you have this great understanding of all these different aspects of the business, and I don't. So I'm wondering, can I go and sit and talk to this, other leader in person, to kind of get a better understanding of this different area? In that meeting, you go in there, talk about how you're leading this project, and you would like butter them up and get and ask for their input and support around what you're doing. It's really about learning how to navigate those relationships and getting in front of people, because if you're waiting for someone to give you that credit and recognition, especially when things are going well, because when things go wrong, oh, you will get it. But when things are going well, you're going to have to put yourself in those spaces and not um, depend or count on someone else to do it for you.
mm. Girl, I love all of that. So I like the documentation piece, like, yes, right? Because also, if we're in a traditional org where there's one annual performance review, right?
Yep.
It is real that individuals are not going to remember everything. I don't
Yep.
even remember everything for myself unless I look back on my own documentation, my own notes, right? And so that
Mhm.
is a real experience, and being intentional about like connecting that to the leadership initiatives that you're leading as it relates to DEI work. I love that. Uh, and I'm sure, yeah, we all can think of the experience where we're sitting at that performance review, and like we're looking at the scores, and we're like, that doesn't line up with what
Mhm.
I've been doing up in here,
Yep.
right? Only for like the person in front of us to be like, well, can you give me examples? And so we go listing examples, and they're sitting there like, oh, I didn't remember that,
Mhm.
or I didn't know that, right?
That part. Yeah.
Um, So yeah, that documentation piece is so key. And when we recommend to our clients the importance of regular recognition, it also is a data point for the rest of the organization, right? So if we are meeting biannually as an organization or quarterly as an organization or team or what department, what have you, and we're recognizing one another, those are all data points, right? So then
Yeah.
at the end of the year, like, you not only have your documentation, but you have such and such a shout out back in first quarter. You have such and such
Yeah.
a shout out back in the second and third quarter, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, thank you for like those practical tips. And just hearing you share like all throughout our interview and sharing those points, like your boldness and your courage are so evident in just how you've navigated your own leadership as a Black woman. And I do want to take a moment to like pause and like also speak to the Black woman who is having an imposter experience, right?
Mm.
um these things, yes, they require being bold and courageous, but they're feasible, right? And so also for us to take stock of like what is the work required within me
Yeah.
to navigate through that imposter experience, right? So
Yes.
if I am that person who's doing all this work and I desire to write that job description, increase my influence in the organization, increase my pay as the individual doing this work, right? Like we may actually have to do some work within ourselves
Yeah.
and go back to what we talked about earlier, right? That intra personal communication, right? Like we may have to prep talk ourselves. We may have to affirm ourselves or remind ourselves, like, no, you are deserving of this.
Yes.
This is for you. If you desire it, then it's for you, right?
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, there may be some barriers, there may be some hurdles that you have to jump through.
Yeah.
But the fact that you desire it, it is enough to like get
Yes.
that fuel going. And it is not something that you need to shy away from, right? Like, it's
Mhm.
like, oh, like, well, I've never been in a leadership role. Like, no, sis, you've been doing this, right?
That part.
You're just formalizing it, right?
Mhm. Yep.
So I as a Black woman leader who regularly has these imposter experiences, it is daily work, right? Once you get to a certain role, right? I'm in the role of chief of strategy, does not mean that this imposter experience done disappeared
Right.
out of my world, right? Like, it is a regular daily experience that I have to navigate through.
Yep.
And it's helpful when I have a team around me, and a boss lady that I look up to who's like constantly, also affirming me and remind and like pointing out to me like, oh no, like you you can do this, right?
Yep.
Um, but yeah, there is the internal piece that complements this external work
Yeah.
as well. Okay, so would love for you to take a moment and talk to the Black women who are pursuing leadership in this way, who are pivoting from their roles. Maybe they're already in it, right? And
Mhm.
they're feeling like they're swimming under and need
Mm.
a breath of fresh air. What what would you like to say to them? What would you like them to remember while they're in this space?
Mm. I think you spoke to it. Like, you are more than enough. I mean, for you to even have entered into this space, you had to be 10 times greater just to be in the space. That's baseline for us. So I think it's that recognition and that understanding and staying in the space of knowing that you are more than enough, you are more than capable, and not to allow some of those internal communications that uh, come from socialized messaging to really impact the way that you're navigating the world. Um, I would also say to be careful of who and what you give up, and who and what you give it up for.
Mm,
And I'm talking about ourselves. And I spoke about being disconnected. I think sometimes we think when we acclimate in a certain way, it'll get us to the space that we want to be in. And I've seen Black people, Black women in leadership who did all the right things on paper, adhered to the status quo, and still got tossed to the side.
mm,
So be mindful of what you're giving up, who you're giving up for, and make sure it's worth it. Of course, it's going to be a struggle, and there's going to be barriers, and there's going to be things, but I think always paying attention to self, always being connected to self, always making sure that you're taking care of yourself in whatever ways that you can or have capacity to or access to. That's not a fluff thing. That's not an extra thing. That is a requirement for your survival in this space. And so making sure that you're doing that, staying in touch and taking care of yourself, and remembering that you are more than capable, more than enough.
mm. That's beautiful. I received that on behalf of
Yes.
everyone else. Um, it, yeah, and it like this. Um, it just reinforces the importance of like having a vision for yourself and having a set of values for yourself, right? That
Yeah.
you can fall back on and be and like use as your measuring stick. Like, is this actually aligned with my values? Is this
Yeah.
actually aligned with the bigger vision I have for myself and my life, right? Like,
Yeah.
how 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 am I in misalignment right now, and what is required
Hmm.
of me to get back
Yes.
in line? Yeah, so thank you for that. Okay, so to close us out, in 30 seconds or less, I would love to see you do this. I can never do this, but I'm asking you the question. In 30 seconds or less, what would you love to see come out of your work?
I think, yeah, it's simple for me. I think that Black women, there's a little bit more progress as it relates to Black women. Like, I don't think racism is going to end anytime soon, um, but that my work leads to Black women feeling more comfortable and confident about themselves, and they exude that in any space that they're entering, and that they, going back to the Bernice quote, that they belong to themselves and they don't care the cost, and the cost is also not as much as it's been in the past.
Mm, mhm. That's good, Octavia. Thank you. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
indulging me in this conversation. You've been an amazing guest. I would love to do it again.
Same. You've been an amazing host.
Woo-hoo. All right, IAL family, thank you for joining us today. We'll see you soon. Well, you'll see Enrico soon, but thank you for joining us for this conversation on today. Bye.
Bye.